would you like to naturally heal type 2 diabetes? Sammy Williams will tell us how. And what's so special about Sammy is she's a degree-qualified nutritionist, intuitive eating coach, yoga meditation teacher, and Reiki master with a holistic and compassionate approach to health and healing. Now, tell us first, what is type 2 diabetes and how can entrepreneurs and how can people worldwide naturally heal type 2 diabetes? Heal Podcast with Lily Patrascu shares longevity and anti-aging techniques to stay young forever, increase energy, overcome addiction, and live your longest, best life ever. Shared by world's most innovative, alternative, and traditional health thought leaders, healers, and doctors. Discover quantum healing strategies to heal your mind, body, and soul.
Hi, Lily. Thanks so much for the introduction. It's lovely to be here. So type 2 diabetes is an inflammatory condition, actually. In fact, most metabolic diseases are. So inflammation is like a natural response of the immune system. So if we cut ourselves or something, the inflammatory response will kick in. We might see like red on the surface of our skin. It might get a bit hotter. And this is actually the body's natural process of helping to heal itself and protect itself also from other invading things coming in. But what happens when somebody is maybe living in a highly stressed state? Maybe they're feeding their body with food that is maybe ultra processed or highly processed. Maybe they're not getting enough sleep, not drinking enough water, eating foods that are very high in saturated fats or refined sugar. What can happen is that the body ends up in this state of like low level but chronic inflammation. And this can be happening in the background for years. It can start in your early 20s, even earlier than that, actually. And it can be there in the background, not really showing itself particularly until somebody receives a diagnosis of a condition such as type 2 diabetes, or insulin resistance is like the precursor to type 2 diabetes. And this is really caused by almost like an overuse of the pancreas. So the pancreas is one of the organs in the body which releases enzymes and also some hormones as well. Enzymes are part of the digestive system that help the breakdown of food to release nutrients. And the hormones are there to kind of regulate the control of assimilation of those nutrients around the body and also the metabolism as well. And insulin is one of the key players in that process. And so if somebody has type 2 diabetes, what's happened is that because they've had very high levels of sugar in their diets over a very prolonged period of time, as well as high fat as well, insulin becomes not as effective anymore. So insulin is a little bit like a key that comes to a cell, and it goes to the cell and it unlocks the cell to the sugar. So it allows the cell to take up sugar. And in type 2 diabetes, the lock, if you like, is damaged, and the insulin, maybe the key, is also damaged and it's not working correctly. So it doesn't open up the cell to the sugar to come into it so it can be metabolized. And so what happens is that the person ends up with high sugar in their blood, which is very dangerous because it can damage the lining of the blood vessels. Our whole body is covered in capillaries, which take blood to all the tiny little extremities and everything like that, and it can damage those capillaries and cause problems with vision, problems in the kidneys, problems in the extremities as well. And so a lot of people are living with that, and they maybe don't know it yet. So
thank you. So for those that are experiencing insulin resistance, what are the symptoms?
Yeah, really good question. So the symptoms might be fatigue. So, you're not able to do the things that you used to do. Maybe you're having cravings for like sugary foods, usually foods that are high in carbohydrates or refined carbohydrates specifically. So white flour kind of type foods. You might feel thirsty also quite a lot of the time, but never really feel satisfied by drinking. Also, it can cause brain fog, like crashes after food. So if you eat a meal and then you really want to go to sleep, that can also be a sign. So there's signs that, a lot of people maybe live with on a daily basis because they think it's just a normal part of life and it's part of being stressed and working hard. But actually, if you're worried that, you have got any of these symptoms, then that can be part of it. But also things like weight gain, abdominal fat, like on the front of the body that is really difficult to move. Those are the main symptoms to look out for.
Thank you. What are some small steps that people who have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes can implement to make a big difference?
Yeah, so initially, one of the best ways to change it is to do some intermittent fasting. So that's a really easy way to just kind of reduce the amount of food you're eating. And fasting has a really beneficial effect on regulating blood sugar as well. So that could be one thing, something like, following the 5-2 pattern, where you have 2 days a week where you have about 500 calories, and then the rest of the time you're having sort of like normal food. You could reduce your eating window. So you could do like a 16-8 eating pattern every day. So for example, you have 16 hours where you're fasting and 8 hours where you're having your feeding window. Excuse me. And that basically just reduces the number of meals you have generally, because normally you'd probably only have 2 meals in that 8 hours rather than 3 if it's a longer window. So that's the first thing. Second thing is to increase your consumption of fiber. So fiber is one of the best nutrients for regulating blood sugar, because it fills you up, so it keeps you more satisfied. It slows down the absorption of sugar into the blood and also fat into the blood as well. And it keeps you fuller for longer. So you're much less likely to get a spike after eating a fibrous meal and then a crash. And it's the crash that normally causes the carbohydrate cravings. Fiber just kind of regulates everything, keeps it a bit more stable. So foods that are high in fiber are things like fresh vegetables or cooked vegetables, fruit, whole grains. So a lot of people think, insulin resistance, they have to avoid carbohydrates. That isn't the case. You've just got to change the type of carbohydrate that you're having. So rather than having white refined products, you go for like wholemeal, whole grain, with the whole grain in it. So it's been ground up, so it's got all the fiber in there and the other nutrients that go along with that as well. So that's another thing. And then third thing is also hydration. A lot of people forget to drink water during the day. We might be drinking coffee and tea and all these other drinks, but actually hydration is really, really important to help to regulate the blood sugar and the blood fat metabolism. And then the fourth thing you can do is to limit your intake of refined sugar. So I'm not saying don't have anything sweet, but rather than having, a dairy milk chocolate bar, for example, try to have dark chocolate, which is usually like higher in nutrients. And also you can have like dates rather than things like sweets and stuff like that, because although they're sweet, they are a whole food. And the fifth thing really is to consume whole foods, as many whole foods as you can. So the less processed the food is, the more nutrient dense it's going to be, and the more satisfying it's going to be for you as well. So like I said, rather than having a processed chocolate bar, have a date, which is a bit more of a whole food. So those are kind of 5 things that people can start doing straight away.
Thank you. Tell us about 3 case studies of people you've worked with where they've suffered from type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, and tell us how long it's been since they started implementing some steps and how are they going?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'm not going to name the people, but the first they're all men actually. I do work with a lot of men who are kind of in their late 50s, early 60s, because this is the sort of age where you start to see these symptoms coming up. Can be sooner, but it's usually around there. So one guy I worked with, he was insulin resistant, so his HbA1c I think was about 43 from memory, and which is just in the pre-diabetic range. So he wasn't fully into type 2 diabetes at that point, but he also wanted to lose weight as well. So that's a big part of this journey for a lot of people because they're related. And so I put him on my 3-month program, which is basically a process of teaching somebody how to nourish their bodies to regulate the blood sugar naturally. All the people that I work with, they don't want to use medication. So that's a big thing in, all of the Western world these days, is people medicate for most of these things. But actually, this is a condition that is caused by dietary choices, so it can actually be prevented and healed with dietary choices as well. So yeah, he went from being 43, he's now down to 35 HbA1c, which is a massive improvement. So that's him. He also lost 15 kilos as well in that process within like 6 months. So although I put people on a 3-month program, a lot of people continue to work with me after that because they just want to kind of keep going, and having that accountability and support is really important on a journey like that. And then another guy that I worked with last year, he was a similar situation, but he was pre-diabetic. He had type 2 diabetes, but he was also on metformin, which is the medication that a lot of people go on for that. And he also wanted to lose like 20 kilos. So he was quite overweight as well. But yeah, and I think with him, he saw so many different changes. It wasn't just in the diabetes, he received the weight loss. He also was able to heal joint pain that he was living with because he was constantly in pain. He couldn't get up out of a chair. He really was like very down on himself and his life, even though he has an 8-year-old son, who obviously needs him as a father, but he was just, he just kind of given up a little bit. And so seeing his transformation from being in that place, feeling really low and not really wanting to carry on, to suddenly, enjoying going for walks in the woods, feeling a lot lighter in his body, feeling really empowered that he could actually make these changes for himself, and he knew how to do that. And also his diabetes completely left him as well. He was able to kind of manage that naturally to come off his medication eventually as well. So that was an amazing success story. And then one other guy that I worked with, a similar kind of age, same story really. And, this is a story that I see repeating, overweight, living with a whole list of medication. I think he was on 10 different medications. He actually had developed a condition called neuropathy, which is where, because of the diabetes, the extremities, like the fingers and the toes, they don't get enough blood because the blood vessels have been damaged by the high blood sugar. And he'd actually lost the feeling in his legs. So he was actually in a wheelchair when I first started working with him. From being completely able to walk and fine to not being able to walk and having been in hospital for a couple of months. So he was basically on a journey to be able to get back on his motorbike. That was his goal. And he did that eventually with the help that I offered him, and his hard work. Because these processes are not just about the guide, it's about the person and how invested they are in doing that. And he also had a young son who he wanted to, make sure he was around for as well. So, we've all got a reason to live. We've all got a reason to make changes to our health. And, this type of journey is so transformational for people. Not just in the health side of things, but also in their mental state and their feeling of like having empowerment around being able to actually do this for themselves, not relying on a system, not relying on doctors or medication or all that sort of stuff, but actually being able to really kind of do this for themselves.
Thank you. I used to look after a child that had type 1 diabetes, and I noticed the kind of life that he had, and it was I would describe it as very, very difficult, because he had to have like these injections, and then we had to literally track every single food that he was eating, and then kind of calculate how many milliliters of insulin he had to inject and so on. It was very complicated. And then if I made any little mistake, or if there was a mistake in the calculation, then he could, like, his blood sugar could go down, and he could have like a proper emergency. So, I'm wondering about people who are kind of going from, let's say, insulin resistance towards type 2 diabetes. Tell us about what kind of a lifestyle are they likely to have, and what are they likely to be normally given by doctors? Like, what are the kind of like symptoms that they're likely to experience, and what's the general treatment that they tend to get, so that we can like understand the impact of kind of like getting there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, like I said before, it's not something that just suddenly happens. It's been happening in the background for probably a number of years before you actually realize that something's wrong. And, when you go for that blood test and your doctor tells you that you have insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes, then, you're faced with a choice at that point. The lifestyle you've been living has obviously resulted in this happening. It's like type 2 diabetes is developed from dietary issues. It's not type 1 diabetes, which you can be born with, and it can, it's maybe hereditary as well. Whereas type 2 is due to lifestyle choices, and the lifestyle choices that would potentially create that are things like being sedentary, so not exercising, not moving your body, having an ultra processed or a highly processed diet, so eating lots of foods that are not real food, not whole foods, things like lots of fast food, takeaways, pizzas, that kind of stuff. And also, sadly, in our countries today, in the Western world particularly, I know America's really bad for it, also the UK, we have a lot of ultra processed foods in our diet that we don't realize. Things like bread, for example, wholemeal bread. People think, oh, it's wholemeal, it's healthy. But if you actually turn it over and look at the ingredients on there, it's not actual bread. It's a mixture of all these different chemicals that have been put together to make it seem like bread, but actually it isn't. So kind of becoming a bit more savvy about what food you're choosing is important. So you've got the sedentary, you've got the dietary choice, the ultra processed lifestyle, just not caring about your health, not prioritizing your health as well. When we're younger, we just feel invincible and we think, oh, we can do whatever we want to our bodies and it won't matter. But as we get older, we realize that's not the case. And so, shifting the mindset is a really important part of the journey as well. And yeah, maybe like binge eating is also a really common contributor to diabetes. Emotional eating, lots of people use food to manage stress and grief and loneliness and all these emotions that we are never taught to actually sit with and feel in our bodies. We're taught to distract ourselves from them because they're bad and we shouldn't feel them. So yeah, there's a whole kind of psychology around that as well, which I also look at with my clients, which is, the intuitive eating part of what I do. So somebody gets a diagnosis like that, the usual kind of route people go down is metformin. It's one of the medications that has been shown to really help with type 2 diabetes. Glycoside also is another medication that people might be on, which kind of it acts on the pancreas, and also people will be told to look at diet, but most people are told to stop eating carbohydrates, which is not a sustainable dietary change. If you sit with somebody in a surgery that's just been diagnosed with diabetes, and then you say to them, yeah, you can't ever eat bread ever again. I mean, that's not sustainable. Nobody's going to go, okay, that's fine, I'm going to do that and be able to do it. So, there needs to be, I'm not saying that medication is bad at all. I think it's a really important part of the process of healing. But to just rely on that one thing on its own is not the best advice for people, because making the correct dietary changes alongside a nutritionist like myself or a dietitian is going to give them the power to be able to actually create healing in their bodies. So the idea, I think, what should happen is that medication should be like an interim measure to help them manage the condition at the beginning, with a view to coming off it once they have healed the condition using dietary changes. I mean, that would be my ideal kind of view of what our healthcare systems would look like in the future.
Thank you. And give us some examples of worst case scenarios of people that have type 2 diabetes. What can they expect in terms of lifestyle changes or impact on their body? What are the kind of like symptoms they might get?
Yeah, so over time, so like I mentioned before, the guy that I worked with who had neuropathy, that's like a really extreme kind of symptom, but that's the road that people could potentially go down if they don't get help in the right way. Obviously, medication can help with reducing the likelihood of that happening, but medication does have side effects as well. So that's why I really strongly promote dietary change, because there are no side effects. Like, the side effects is that you get to enjoy nice food and heal your body naturally. So also vision, it can affect your vision as well. excuse me. So like, because of the tiny blood vessels in the eyes, actually they can be damaged, and that can reduce blood flow. So it stops you being able to see as clearly. Kidney problems are really common also with type 2 diabetes. So frequent urination and a lot of thirst as well. And yeah, just generally feeling unwell. Somebody with insulin resistance doesn't feel energetic. They don't feel positive mentally. And they feel like they're in this sort of life sentence then. But that's my message. It isn't a life sentence. You can change it, and you can, lift yourself out of those symptoms really quite quickly. I do a detox at the first part of my program, and within 7 days, people notice a difference. I think one of the guys I was speaking about earlier, his fasting blood sugar went from 8.3 to 6.3 in 7 days. That's a massive shift in just 7 days. And all he did was start eating plant-based foods. He did some intermittent fasting, and he just reduced his meals to 2 a day. It's not really difficult stuff. And I think to somebody who's in that situation of just been diagnosed, they don't know what to do, they're not sure which way to go, seek out a nutritionist or dietitian who's an expert in type 2 diabetes, and they will be able to help you and guide you to doing things in a different way, so that you're not looking at a lifetime of medication if that's not what you want. Some people want that. Some people are like, I don't care, I'm just going to take medication and carry on doing what I'm doing. But if you're not that person, if you want to, make a change and actually live a better life and really change the way you're relating to your body and food, then I urge you to do something different.
Thank you. What about people who want to continue to have a great lifestyle, in the sense of continue to enjoy a yummy meal, and to perhaps switch the things they normally eat with something that still looks great and feels great, but is not so damaging? Are there any like magic superfoods that people can consume that will help them in their journey towards healing type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance?
Yeah, I think, there's that kind of misconception that when you're on this sort of journey, you have to like eat foods that are not very good. But, I've been on a whole journey with my diet, and I used to be vegan and now I'm not. And, I've got this whole kind of wealth of recipes that you can use, which are going to give you this amazing like range of food that you can eat. And actually what happens when you change the way you're eating and you do introduce more plants into your diet, your gut microbiome changes. So you actually start to crave different types of foods anyway. So the foods that you might see as yummy might change. I've seen that with all my clients. They don't want to eat like a croissant in the same way they used to. They might have one occasionally, but they're not like, oh, it's the best food ever. They actually really enjoy to eat like a bowl of oats in the morning instead. So, there are subtle changes that kind of happen over the process, which really help people to change what foods they actually want to eat as well. And I'm not saying, you're never allowed to eat a burger again, or you're never allowed to have a kebab or whatever it is, but you're doing it through the lens of knowledge, first of all. So about that food, you understand what it does for you, but you're doing it with awareness. So I know I'm going to eat this food. I know it's going to do this to my body, but I'm choosing that right now in this moment, and I'm okay with that. But it's the kind of 3 meals a day, not thinking about it, not caring about it. That's what causes the problem in the first place. So the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Albert Einstein said that, and it's so true. You can't keep doing the same thing and wanting to be healthy. You've got to change what you're doing in order to get a different result.
Thank you. What are some great yummy foods that you, for example, have introduced into the diets of yourself or other clients that you've worked with, that you've kind of become so accustomed to that you can recommend? So for example, like, do you recommend, replacing coffee with, lion's mane mushrooms, or are there any other more exciting foods that people have not considered that are actually really great that you've introduced into the lives of your clients?
Yeah, I mean, actually coffee is really good for you. It's really high in fiber, it's high in polyphenols and antioxidants. What's wrong with coffee is all the syrups and all the other stuff people put in it. So just changing the relationship with what your coffee looks like is a start. Also, having like turmeric in your food at any time when you can. Like I put it in my oats in the morning. If you make a smoothie, putting it in there, because turmeric is an anti-inflammatory, and it's a really, really strong anti-inflammatory. So, if you're making a soup or a stew or a curry or something like that, adding that in is really beneficial. Also like matcha or green tea, they're also really good because, again, high in antioxidants. So it really helps to bring down inflammation. I have a really nice recipe for like black bean burgers, which, obviously people love a burger, don't they, these days? So having that instead of with white potato fries, having it with sweet potato fries, that kind of thing. So you're still having those foods, but you're just having it in a slightly different way. So you're still getting the pleasure and enjoyment from that. So those are kind of like a few little tips that have just come to me now.
Thank you. I'm trying to lose weight, and I think I'm suffering from insulin resistance, although I haven't been diagnosed, but I have seen on the internet that, for example, if you have a lot of little moles, I'm not sure if they're even called moles, it's possible that you may have insulin resistance. You can contradict me. So I'm wondering, for someone who may be suffering from insulin resistance, would you think it's a good thing or it's a damaging thing generally to eat just one meal a day? For example, just breakfast, and to have, let's say, fresh juices. So let's say instead of having like a carrot salad, to have like fresh carrot juice.
Yeah, so I think one meal a day, yes, but it depends what that meal is. So, I would need to know like exactly what you're having in that meal. And I might advise you on, making sure that it's high in protein, high in healthy fats, and high in whole grains and fiber. So that would be important. And then also what time of day you're having it. So you said about breakfast. So yeah, that's, if you can go all day afterwards without eating, then that's no problem. A lot of people like to do it the other way around. So they like to do dinner because they find it easier to, fast overnight and then fast in the morning. But actually, it's better metabolically to eat in the morning because your insulin is more sensitive, your cortisol levels go up and then down. So you have like a little mini sort of spike and crash. And so eating at that point is better. Otherwise, your blood sugar can stay low all day and then you have a bigger spike in the evening. And also, eating just before you go to bed is not ideal either. So that time of day to fast is the best time. In terms of juices, I would definitely say avoid juices. If you think you've got insulin resistance or been diagnosed with it, like fruit juices are, the recommendation in the UK anyway is 150 mils a day maximum, which is a very small amount. Juices are basically fruit which has been crushed down and all the fiber pretty much has been removed. So when you eat fruit, normally the fiber actually slows down the absorption of blood sugar. But when you've removed all the fiber, it just goes in really quickly and causes a massive spike. So I would definitely not recommend juices if you are insulin resistant. Always whole foods and eat the whole, like all the fiber, all of it. So eat the carrot. The carrot is good in its form, and eat it with some hummus or something, which is going to have some healthy fats in it, so that you can slow down the absorption of the sugar as well. Oh, can't hear you.
Those people considering to do like intermittent fasting by just eating one meal a day, do you recommend it should be like a once a week kind of frequency, or can it be like a long-term thing, like a 30-day plan in order to reduce the likelihood of type 2 diabetes?
It would really depend on the person. So, a female doesn't respond in the same way to fasting as a male. Women have, depending on your age, cycles that they go through. There's certain times of the month when fasting is better for you than others. Because fasting at the wrong time of the month can actually cause imbalances in your menstrual hormones as well. So you don't want that to happen. I find that with men, a lot of the time, they find fasting a lot easier than women do, just because of the makeup of their body and their physiology. It's a very difficult question to give like a blanket kind of bit of advice for, which is unfortunately what we expect. We expect one bit of advice that works for everybody, but we're all individuals. Our bodies are going to respond in different ways to different things. So that's why I work with people individually on a one-to-one basis, because I need to know about their specific body, their lifestyle, their symptoms and everything, and give advice based on that. I would say, try fasting if you want to try it. Try a pattern that you think appeals to you, that you think will fit around your lifestyle, and stick with that. 1 day a week, yeah, okay, you might get some benefits from that. Probably would be better off doing a 24-hour fast once a week rather than having like one meal, because in 24 hours your body will go into like mild ketosis, which is where fat is being metabolized instead of sugar, and you're more likely to get benefits from that rather than just having like one meal, because that might end up you being more hungry the next day if you do it like that. And also movement as well, like moving your body, walking, if you've got time to go to the gym, to exercise, to go out for a bike ride, that's also a really good way, 3 times a week. I think they say in the UK 150 minutes a week, of movement. That's quite, it's quite a lot. Most people don't get that. So that would be probably more important, and looking at what you're eating as well. Just carrying on eating, the foods that are causing the problem is not going to help you if you're fasting 1 day a week.
Thank you. One last thing. What was your reason for helping people who suffer from type 2 diabetes? And tell us your personal journey.
Yeah, so basically it was my dad. I was living out in Bangkok from 2017 to 2020. So I was out there during COVID, and I came back in December 2020 to become a nutritionist and study here. And I noticed a real shift in him, and I hadn't seen him for a year because of COVID. I noticed that his face was puffy, his eyes were kind of like sleepy, and he wasn't really fully kind of present. And he'd gained a bit of weight as well, and he's always been very slim and fit and everything. And I just watched him, like when I got home, watched him, and he was eating these like, little desserts and custard and all stuff at like 9 o'clock at night, which is pretty much the worst time to be eating food like that. If you're going to eat that, eat it for breakfast kind of thing. And I noticed that he was just very sleepy, not able to concentrate, not really enjoying himself, no energy. And so I said to him, I was like, have you thought about getting a check for diabetes? Because you're eating a lot of sugar in the evening. I showed him on the packet, you're having like 35, 40 grams of sugar at 9 o'clock at night. That is not going to be good for you. And I know from history that he'd done that a lot of his life. He likes desserts. So he went to get a test, and he did have pre-diabetes. And it was actually before I was a nutritionist, but because I knew a lot about food already, because I've always been interested in that. I helped him to just kind of change a few things with his diet, increase his protein intake. He's in his 70s, so actually that's really important anyway for muscle wasting. And rather than having like a cake in the afternoon, which is what he would do, get him to have some scrambled eggs and toast instead, which is a bit more of a kind of satisfying meal. And so over time he eventually kind of adopted these changes, and my mum was amazing as well. She really helped him out, and and he's now totally fine. So he was able to reverse that situation, and he still eats desserts and stuff now, but my mum just makes them with fruit. She makes them with wholemeal flour, and she makes things at home which are made with whole foods rather than refined sugar. So that was my motivation for particularly type 2 diabetes. My own story is a little bit longer than that. But in a nutshell, basically, I had an eating disorder when I was younger, and I had like really bad metabolic imbalances because of that. So my period stopped, and I was like gaining lots of weight and feeling really disconnected from my body. So that was, and then I healed myself with food. I found help from somebody not pharmaceutical, because my hormones were out of balance. They wanted to put me on hormones and stuff, and I was like, I know it's not that. I know it's my food intake, and so I used food to heal myself and bring my menstrual cycle back and get my body back in balance. And it was then that I decided to do that as a career. So I left my teaching career. I was a science teacher for 15 years. And then I became a nutritionist. So that's what I do now.
Thank you. Tell us where entrepreneurs can connect with you.
Yeah, so you can connect with me on my website. So my website is naturalnut.co.uk, so short for natural nutrition. And also Instagram, so it's natural.nut_. And also on LinkedIn, I'm Samantha J.R. Williams. Natural Nutrition on Facebook as well. And through my website, people can drop me a line if they want to chat, see how I can help them. I offer like a free discovery call, so we can just jump on a call and I can see what we can do.
Thank you. Follow me for more interviews with world's most innovative health change makers to live your healthiest life ever.